Hello everyone, DonTheCrown here, and we're on the PTR for Diablo 4 Season 7, and let's go and go over the witch powers for this season. Now it's kind of a return to form for D4, where we were having a couple seasons there where we were getting a lot of like player power from the seasonal mechanic, and then they kind of dialed that back as we went into like Season 3. We had like just like the little minion, and then Season 4, Season 5, Season 6 didn't really have player power coming from the seasonal mechanic. We did get like more permanent endgame content with like Infernal Hordes, the Pit, the whole expansion and everything. And so this season, basically the theme around it is these witchcraft powers, and in different spots you see there's like kind of this witchcraft tide everywhere, which has a lot of stuff to do, lots of omens, lots of enemies. It kind of does feel quite a bit like season 2 again. This will be a lot of stuff out in the open world, but I want to talk about the powers here real quick. Now, my first kind of impression of these is just that there is a lot of like visual noise going on with these, and I'm really hoping that they dial it back quite a bit. To kind of give you an idea what's going on, like with this Piranado, we have like all these different hexes and stuff going off. You see like this aura that pops out. This is just from that, and then like this like little tornado that's cruising everywhere. That is, oh wow, we're just dying. That's from, you know, Piranado. That's our ultimate. And that's just pretty much up all of the time. So, yeah, that is a lot of visual junk that's going on. So I'm really hoping they dial this back. Especially this one in particular, Wave of Woe. I believe this causes kind of like a very large blue blast to come out of your character. And I've seen people... oh, this one. Abyssal Resonance. So every 250 resonance or resource spent, release an explosion. And so I've seen Kepaleke builds running around just triggering this all of the time. And it just makes it like almost a full screen blue strobing light. Yeah, I wouldn't want to play that, and I wouldn't want to play with anybody doing that. So hopefully that's something that they dial way back, because especially in this open world focused season, not going to be all that great. Now, there's a couple of different types of powers that we can get here. Things like summons or like fire bats and stuff like that. And most of these have hysterically low damage numbers right now. And a lot of the just like flat damage right now seems incredibly bad. Things like fire bat service doing 2,000 total fire damage. This really isn't all that noticeable. And some of these are just like, you know, really very low damage numbers. And so I'm not really sure if they don't want us to be like carrying with the power directly, and you're mostly there for the utility aspect of it, but this kind of feels bad like that. For example, Hexaflames here, I right now have up to a 72% chance to apply Hexaflames, and Hexaflames does a grand total of 60 additional fire damage each time you deal damage to the target. But don't worry, critical strikes will cause that target to explode, dealing the same damage to all nearby enemies. This damage is like incredibly low, and a lot of these like flat damage numbers or flat like bonuses seem hilarious. The one I think that is probably the worst though is Twilight Warding. This kind of feels like a barrier for ants, because every 5 seconds you gain a barrier for 5 seconds, which absorbs 100 damage, and it reflects enemy projectiles. 100 damage. Give you an idea, I have like 5,000 life right now, so that is like nothing at all. And so, and also like this scaling, you can always tell the scaling on these. The blue number goes up as you level it. So this is at maximum rank. You have a 5-second barrier that absorbs 100 and it pops up every 5 seconds. So you have to get this to maximum rank to even have 100% uptime. Now, I'm not sure if you have other barriers, if this will go very last. And so while you have it up, you can reflect enemy projectiles all of the time. That might be kind of cool. But for the most part, most of these powers I kind of think are a little bit underwhelming. And they're probably going to be there mostly to trigger the new gems that they're adding, or just like having some like interesting combinations. Now, one that I want to talk about in particular, though, is lifelink. Now, lifelink, basically you link to 3 nearby enemies, and 3,000% of the damage you take is shared to linked targets as physical damage. And addition for 10 seconds after you use a defensive macabre or subtlety skill, all link damage is a guaranteed crit. Now I have a feeling that this is either going to be not used at all or in some sort of bugged build, just like one-shotting everything. I did test this out with Jacinth Shell. It does not do anything at all, no damage. And so I don't think that that's going to be the cause of the issues. But, you know, I could see maybe people doing something with Thorns with this and having like a lot of like mitigation. Maybe this works with kind of pre-mitigation damage. Not really sure yet. Some other cool stuff in here, though, is like Hex of Shattering does a lot of damage reduction. I do have some of these kind of like powered up. I'll take some of these out here. So like 20% less damage taken from enemies that are basically just hit by you is pretty cool. Things here like Soul Harvest, I think has some potential. This basically allows you, like when you use a cooldown, to siphon a whole bunch of main stat to yourself. And if you're like in a pit, and you're around like 30, 40 enemies, you vacuum them all on top of you. You can carry like a huge main stat bonus forwards. Although if this falls off, you're pretty much just going to have a 1% bonus against the boss, which is like no damage at all, which is kind of bad. Hex of Whispers, I think, is also really insane because this gives you an insane amount of Fortify right now. Like I'm talking like 50% of my entire bar gets filled up when this procs, although it's only supposed to give me 240 Fortify. I'm not really sure what's going on with the scaling there. But there are quite a bunch of different cool powers that I think have some potential to be neat. So like Aura of Siphoning here, for example, does a poison aura around me. I'm playing a Scourge build, so I figure this would be a pretty nice thing to go with, especially because this heals you. But this doesn't really seem to do too much, except if you are looking here at Shaken Soul. So Eldritch effects apply vulnerable to enemies for 10.8 seconds. In addition, damage from Psyche and Growth and Decay effects also apply vulnerable for half the duration. So if you have this leveled up to the point where it includes everything, and you have this aura, it pretty much means that anything that's like in close range of you is going to have vulnerable on it all of the time, which is pretty neat for the Spiritborn specifically, because this really seems like it's probably going to make Vital Strikes super duper strong, because this removes the vulnerable effect, but you're just constantly reapplying it with your aura, which is great. Now, other things in here are like Breath of the Coven. This has the opportunity to give you like 45% extra attack speed, which is very nice. And you can also get 25 lucky hit chance. I think that this is going to be a pretty popular option for a lot of people. Typically, when you get attack speed that is temporary, this goes into what's called Cap 2 by the community, where you can get another separate 100% increased attack speed and Cap 2 from temporary sources like Breath of the Coven here. So I'm assuming this is basically like if you are limited by attack speed at all, just generally like a 45% more damage bonus. So very, very, very strong thing to get here. There are other things in here that increase the effectiveness of your hexes, for example, increase the effectiveness of your auras. So like things like Hex of Shattering here, which normally does 20% less. If you put this in, right now it's a little bit Blizzard math. It should be giving us 29% bonus. It's probably supposed to be 30%, but it's actually giving us 50% bonus. I'm not really sure where the bug is, if the bug's on the tooltip here, or if the bug's on the math. I'm guessing the bug's on the tooltip, but this takes it down to 30% less damage taken, which really, really impactful, especially for bosses and stuff. So I could see this being a pretty popular combination. Increasing your aura size and also making enemies take bonus critical strike damage is pretty neat. And you can also make it so that like, you know, minions and stuff get a big bonus here, for example, with ultimate skills. They grow larger and do 45% more damage. They get 100% critical strike chance for 10 seconds, which is pretty nuts. Getting Fortify is nuts. Some of these, like this frog here, for example, lets you group up enemies. This one gives you the ability to slow enemies tremendously by 70% and give you primary resource. And so there's quite a bit of interesting things in here. Now the last little section, these red ones are all ultimates. You can only have one of these active at a time, and it goes into the big spot. Now the first two I think are pretty lame right now. First one is Doom Orb. It's like a bad, lazy ball lightning. It does very, very, very little damage. And then if it hits a boss a whole bunch, it will explode, doing a little bit more damage, and then come back after 3 seconds. Don't really see this one being very good unless they ramp the damage up significantly. Vengeful Spirit. I thought this one was going to be really broken when I first read it, but basically what it does is every 15 seconds, this ghost pops out and it lasts for 10 seconds. And once you get hit like twice, it is going to explode, but it'll prevent a little bit of damage dealt to you, which is, not really all that crazy. The cycle is also really cool. This makes it so that any damage you deal with skills has a 15% chance to grow a flower from the ground, and the enemy is near, it does poison damage to them, and if an ally is near, it heals you instead. Now this only lets you pop the flower once every 5 seconds per enemy, but this is pretty nuts in terms of how quickly this can spawn if you're running like a pit with lots of enemies all over the place, lots of flowers all over the place. Right now this is bugged for the PTR where the poison damage, I believe, is actually sometimes healing enemies, which is not so great. However, I believe I have gotten it to do damage sometimes because I noticed that it was like killing quite a bit of stuff. Lastly, I think Piranado is probably just going to be the go-to option for most people, mostly because like having the ability to have a permanently up Piranado that just vacuums enemies to it is really easy. All you have to do is hex and aura an enemy, and the hexes are pretty strong. The auras are pretty cool. And so you can just vacuum enemies up. Now, the second part of this is not the powers, but is from this vendor here, Galena, which is the Coven Jeweler. And I really kind of hope that they give this whole area a little bit of a touch up here. As you might notice that they touched up the Tree of Whispers town itself. And there's like these different altars here for different types of witchcraft powers. However, this vendor here is so easy to miss. It kind of feels like they just plopped her down without giving her anything else around her. And she is pretty important, actually. She kind of acts like a jeweler, but she can do some different stuff. And one of the things she can do is turn the materials that you are finding into either like more reputation or into the ability to buy these gems. So these gems kind of cost a little bit of these fugitive heads, which comes from guys that you kill in the like Witch Tide area. You have some Witch Tide like rep currency, and then some more gem fragments. And these are very similar to the season 1 gems that we had that gave us like armor and resistance and then a special power. And there's quite a few of these that are kind of neat, and some of them are just pretty bad. So the very first one here, when I saw Elder Sigil and it scales a whole bunch of different skills, makes them deal more direct damage, I was pretty excited about this. But I noticed for Spiritborn specifically, they made this for incarnate skills only, which I think is just dumb because the only incarnate skill that really does any damage is Razor Wings. And yeah, so this pretty much just says Razor Wings deal increased damage, which, okay, if you're playing Razor Wings, this is pretty nice, but everything else, eh. Now, they do have a whole bunch of these in the blue section that make it so that certain powers become more powerful. So if you're really kind of scaling up one of these powers, like, for example, that Hex that was making the damage reduction go, these are going to be pretty good for you. Phantom String, I think, is probably going to get nerfed because this is like a 40% increased overpowered damage to Hex enemies, which is just like 40% more damage, which is, as we saw last season, pretty bonkers. To be able to scale Overpower, especially if you can have Overpower going every single time. Surely Overpower won't be overtuned for 2 seasons in a row, right? They added one here for minions, so there's like a 25% more damage for minions, which is pretty nice. More power for unique growth and decay. This one's kind of neat for some damage over time builds. So if you have an aura active, you deal damage over time faster. This doesn't necessarily like really increase your damage. This is like not a multiplier for your damage, but this does increase your time to kill, if that makes sense. So like if you applied 1 tick of Incinerate, that Incinerate is going to tick a little bit faster off of the enemy, potentially killing them quicker. But it is not increasing your like DPS because it is shortening the amount of time as well. I'm pretty sure that should be shortening the time. So this is kind of okay. For Spiritborn, I don't think that we want this at all. because generally for damage over time, we're using Noxious Resonance, and we want to explode the damage over time off of the enemies, and so we don't want it to tick faster at all. We would prefer it tick slower or not tick at all, so we can keep all of that damage on the enemy to be exploded. Next up, we have Wicked Pact. This one basically is another one of these ones that increases the potency of some of the powers. Let's get into the yellow ones. These ones are kind of a little bit neat. So if you have 3 or more growth and decay powers slotted, you generate more barrier, more fortify, and get more thorns. So thorns, barbs, rejoice, or thorns builds in general, I guess, rejoice with this. More fortify, more thorns, kind of good for overpower as well. If you have an aura active, pull nearby enemies towards you every 8 seconds. You know, pulling enemies is always pretty popular, so I can see this being popular as well. If you have more than 3 or more eldritch powers slotted, you gain movement speed and critical strike chance. Movement speed and crit, very popular things to get. Crit is kind of like a multiplier in a way, so getting your crit chance as close to 100% is pretty good. And movement speed is like the best stat in the game. Your unique witch powers deal 40% increased damage. This one to me just kind of sucks because your unique witch powers, the red ones, don't really do much damage at all in the first place. So like 40% more damage of 0 is still 0. Spiral Coin makes it so that if you have 3 or more Psyche witch powers, you gain 60% control duration and 20% lucky hit chance. I can see rogues definitely running this, or any build that really wants to stagger bosses quicker. Pretty sure this should help with the time to stagger, and lucky hit chance just in general is pretty nice. There's quite a lot of builds that, you know, wouldn't say no to 20% more lucky hit. Then Vile Philanthropy, I think, is going to be kind of a little bit of a hot topic this season. So if you have a witch power with the summon tag slotted, if you would take fatal damage, instead prevent that damage, then gain a barrier equal to 100% of your maximum life, and disable your witch powers with the summon tags for 6 seconds. And this can only occur once every 75 seconds. That's right, a cheat death gem here in seasonal powers. I don't like this. I think that there was a pretty good reason for them to get rid of the cheat death kind of stuff that we had in the game before. And so reintroducing it with a seasonal power, I don't know, man. I don't like it in general. Now, the hardcore players might be loving this. This might be something they're definitely going to go out and get. But yeah, I'm not big hype for that. Lastly, we have the legendary ones here. So each of your auras and hexes and enemies afflicted by, they take 4% increased damage. You can get 5 of these basically. And so that would be a 20% multiplier. I have a feeling that this is, if they don't increase the numbers on the ones that do direct damage, pretty much everyone's just going to run this to do more damage and try to stack as many auras and hexes as they possibly can, and just do more damage that way. Friend of the Bog, I think, is kind of neat. This makes it so your primary stat and maximum life goes up and you're always unhindered, which just allows you to, I believe, run through enemies like you're whirlwinding. It does not make you unstoppable, but this is, you know, primary stats, more damage. Maximum life can be more damage, but it's definitely more survivability. Mind Wreath is pretty cool. This makes it so that your defense, macabre, and trap skills have reduced cooldown, and especially for my Scourge build, like reducing my defensive skills is something that I temper for. So having another source of that is pretty nice. Moonlit Ward here. For each rank of your slotted unique witch power, you gain 3% damage reduction and 1% max res. And you have like 5 ranks basically. So this is the equivalent of 15% DR and 5 max res. So this is pretty like mandatory, I feel like, for endgame to give yourself a little bit more damage reduction. It is definitely pretty nice. Voice of the Stars. This one is a little weird. Now, while you have an aura active, your ultimate skills each gain each witchcraft tag and deal increased damage. So like things like the Devourer here, if I have an aura active, it doesn't work in town, which is something I'm really annoyed by. But if I was out in the field and had an aura active, it would have all of the witchcraft tags as well. And I'm not really sure what kind of the point of that is. I think that you probably want this to scale with Purging Touch. So your Eldritch effects deal 48% increased damage, but it wasn't really clear from the tooltip whether or not this was working. And also, it doesn't gain aura, it doesn't gain hex. So there's two kind of like damage scalars that you're not going to see. So I can just show you how this looks right here. You can see we get Growth and Decay, Psyche, and Eldritch are the three Witchcraft tags that you pick up from that. And so potentially we could maybe do some damage with this. Like they did add some more damage to your like rank 5 of your ultimates. And so like, for example, Spiritborn's the Devourer, we get healing bonus received on our Devourer itself at rank 5. And so it goes from doing like 182 baseline to 671 with my current setup, which is, you know, kind of nice. And then last but not least, the final gem here is the Witching Hour. So we have 3 or more Eldritch Witch powers slotted. Every 5 seconds, your next core skill gains the Eldritch tag. I think this is just lame. It's like every 5 seconds, you get like maybe a little bit more damage. You get some effects and stuff like that on your one next core skill. Maybe if you can like snapshot this onto Whirlwind, that might be like kind of neat. But for the most part, this feels very much like Season 0 type of power, where it's just like kind of like a very slow combat thing. Now, another thing I want to talk about here is that the way that you craft these, I find to be very, very annoying. So in order to craft these legendary ones here, I need to have in my pocket several of the lower tier ones here. So I have to have 2 blue and a rare, but then to craft the rare, I have to have 2 other blues. And so I basically need to craft 4 blue sigils, but the materials for these aren't really all that crazy. It's just a whole bunch of restless rot, which is like you just get from killing enemies in the Witch Tide. You need fugitive heads, which you also get from killing bosses in the Tide, and then ruby fragments. And so I really just think that they need to make it so that these costs are like amplified up, so I don't have to like go and craft 4 things up here, then craft 1 thing here, and then craft 1 thing here. This kind of feels very convoluted and kind of messy. And on top of that, I just think that like if these the reason they're making us like craft this way is because these drop and hit the ground in any way, shape, or form. I'm gonna be very upset. The reason for that is our storage is just so freaking bad when it comes to the socketables tab, because like we have all of the runes, we now have all of these other gems, and if they all go in the same spot, I'm gonna be really very, very, very unhappy. So hopefully they don't tend to do that, or they just give us a tab specifically for the League Mechanic stuff, that we always have a League Mechanic tab that all the stuff goes in there. That would be pretty nice. But hopefully this video helped you out a little bit. Definitely be checking out the season when it pops off. We'll be playing PoE 2 once this starts, I guess tomorrow, or I guess later today. But hopefully you guys have a good time. And yeah, we'll see you again soon.